okay. I'm just going to do like a little test of the audio because we've been having some sound issues. So if you hear it repeated, it's just me playing it. Okay, I'm just going to do like a little test of the audio because we've been having some sound issues. All right, that looks like that worked okay. Technology is our saving grace and also deeply terrifying at times. So it is just after 2 o'clock, and we'll get started in just a moment. I'm just going to get settled. But welcome to Honoria's virtual birthday party. Okay. All right, that looks like that. Okay. Now that that's all sorted. Hello, everybody who is joining us. My name is Molly Feibel. I am one of the historic interpreters here at Claremont State Historic Site. And today would have been Honoria Livingston McVitty's 112th birthday. So because it so fortuitously fell on a Sunday, which is a typical day for us to do some programming, it seemed like a good time to just celebrate Honoria. So we're going to go through a slideshow of photos, mostly taken by Honoria's mother, Alice, and in photo albums here at Claremont. So to get started, a little bit of background on Honoria. Honoria Livingston was born on February 7th, 1909, and her parents were John Henry Livingston and Alice Delafield. So, as I said, Honoria is born in 1909. Her sister Janet is born just about 10 months later in 1910. And as I said in the caption here, they were basically raised as twins. They were, the sort of typical term would be Irish twins, less than a year apart. And it's very hard to tell in these pictures, and I will apologize in advance for chronological issues that may happen throughout this slideshow. It's always very hard to tell how old the kids are in these photos. But I would guess in these particular pictures, Honoria, who is on the left, is probably about 4, and Janet on the right is 3. So when Honoria was born, she was given a very unique name in the Livingston family. If you are familiar with the Livingston family, or if you've taken a tour here at Claremont, one thing you have probably noticed is we see the same names a lot. There are a whole lot of Roberts in this family, and in fact there are several Robert Roberts, because you would be named after your father and your grandfather. There are also quite a few Margarets, and even Honoria's little sister Janet is named after her ancestor, Janet Livingston Montgomery. Honoria, however, is the only Honoria in this particular branch of the family, at least. And it's a very unique name. It is not one you see very often at all, within the family or even without. And literally, it means honor to. So her middle name is Alice, meaning her name, Honoria Alice, means honor to Alice, which is paying a little homage to her mother, Alice Delafield Clarkson Livingston, which is really nice, and it sort of sets her apart from the rest of the family. So here we have some more pictures of a young Honoria. The left-hand picture shows her and Janet. Honoria is on the right, Janet on the left. They're holding their dolls. They have a little toy, it looks like a polar bear, on the ground with them. And we have a lot of pictures of them playing with toys, playing with games. And again, they were very close. They grew up right here in this house and spent a lot of time together. And the right-hand picture shows Honoria slightly older than in the left-hand picture, and she is playing with a hoop and a stick, which, if you watched the presentation about Alice's photo albums, I tried to pick different photos this time so that we wouldn't just look at all the same ones again, but this one did make an appearance then as well. And it's really nice because it shows Honoria sort of playing a very historic game that her colonial ancestors probably would have played. And you would have a hoop and a stick. And essentially the idea is you try to roll the hoop as far as you can. You try to catch it with the stick. It's a racing game. It's a try to catch the hoop game. That is not a thing, but you know what I mean. And century. This series of photos is actually taken on Honoria's birthday, her 5th birthday in 1914, February 7th. It is one of the few collections of photos that Alice dated in the album, which was very helpful. And presumably, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that Honoria was given this doll for her birthday. And what I like about this series of photos, most of all, is you see a very nice sort of transition in facial expressions. Very serious Honoria on the left with her new doll. In the middle, it looks like she might be either getting resituated or even talking to her mother. And then we get the nice little smile on the right. And I just think it's very similar to any photo. Here are 2 photos that are incredibly relevant as we look outside. Doesn't seem to be snowing right now, but it was earlier today. And of course, there's still some snow on the ground if you're in New York. And on the left-hand side, we have the family getting ready to go out sledding in the snow. And on the right, we have Honoria and Janet all bundled up in their snowsuits. And we have a collection of writing from Alice Delafield, Clarkson Livingston. I won't say her full name every time, I promise, it's just a reflex. Honoria and Janet's mother, and she wrote this little story called Written for My Children One Snowy Day at Claremont. And it is just full of little anecdotes and little stories about her daughters and things they enjoyed and time they spent outside with their family. And so I thought I'd read a couple little passages that feature Honoria specifically. And what's really adorable about this is we discovered that Honoria had a nickname when she was little. She was known as Noya. And at least part of me wonders if that is a nickname given to her by Janet. Oftentimes when we have younger siblings who can't quite pronounce the older sibling's name, they get a nice little abbreviated version, and that very much sounds like it could be the case. But Alice writes, about this time last winter, we received an English bloodhound puppy. His arrival had been eagerly awaited by the children, whose special property he was to be. So though the mercury was very near to 0, I let them go to the stable to superintend the liberation of our future guardian. They were wrapped into such stubby little bundles they could scarcely bend, and this somewhat hurt their pride. But contours were soon forgotten at sight of the friendly puppy, a jolly mass of wrinkled fat some 2 months old. His appearance was the reverse of formidable, as he wriggled from his traveling crate to eat the food the children offered, but his name made up for all he so lacked in size, and was decidedly impressive. Bonhampton Lion. That, at least, was his bona fide registered name, but we found ourselves unable to live up to it. Noya looked at me with such accusing eyes when I told her, and said firmly, "That is not a lion, mother. It's a doggy." And as it was not sufficiently clear to my own mind why a dog should be called a lion, I felt I preferred to postpone explanations and invited her to suggest a name herself. Noya's proposals for the bloodhound failed to reach our expectations. We felt that Brownie, Timmy, or Tiny might prove mortifying to him in maturer years. So after some discussion, it ended in the compromise of Rufus, partly because of his red color, but chiefly because Rufy was permissible and exceedingly agreeable to junior members of the family. Noya told me one day she could hardly wait for all the wildflowers to come out again, and Janet, overhearing, put in, "Well, I can hardly wait for motor cars to come out again." and from her tone you would have thought they too sprung from the teeming earth. The heavy snows have deprived Janet of one of her great pleasures, for she and her sister do not altogether agree as to modes of locomotion. Noya always likes the pony cart, because you go slowly and can get in and out all the time to gather flowers. Janet likes the cart whenever it's her turn to drive, but at other times is more or less willing to forgo the charms of wayside dallying for the rapid progress of a car. Noya came to her father with a letter she had scribbled to me at one time when I had to spend a few nights in town, and asked him to address it for her, because I don't know Mother's name. I overheard her telling Janet, when she began to be proficient in playing with a ball, that she was catching it punctually. Another day, when she had been singing and stopped, Janet wanted her to go on, and called out, "Wind it up again." "There is nothing to wind," said Honoria sedately. What I think I like most about that whole collection is it's just great little insight into these two young girls, and they are just such fun little stories about Janet and Honoria. And you really see the difference in personalities between these two children. Honoria is clearly very interested in all things that are becoming of a proper young lady. She likes singing. She wants to make sure she's formally addressing her letters. She loves to pick flowers. She's very preoccupied with the fact that a dog is not a lion. She's a very sensible young girl. And then you have Janet, who is much more interested in motor cars and toy pistols and cobwebs. And so even from a very young age, they are these two very distinct personalities. And you see that reflected in their photos. And as today we're going to be looking mainly at photos of Honoria, you're going to see a very of them. For example, these two are, again, nice little portraits of her when she is a young girl. On the left, there she is in her room, and on the right, obviously, she's outside, with a little bit of a smirk there, but she's very serious in a lot of her portraits. These two I really like because they are very formal. On the left-hand side, we have what looks more like a studio portrait. There's a series of photos from that same session, a couple of which feature Janet, and some that feature Janet and Honoria. But there's a very big similarity between these two photos. There's the same sort of, again, I'm going to keep saying formality to them, this very stately nature that you see in Honoria, even when she is a very young girl. Her posture, the way she carries herself, her sense of how to look at the camera and how to pose at the camera. It's just it feels very grown up for such a young girl. She is a little bit older in these photos. Again, I wish I knew the specific years, but it is a little hard to tell. Mainly I tried to go off of her hair lengths. But here we have, again, on the left, we have a more sort of portrait, a more formal portrait of Honoria, sort of very dramatic. And then on the right-hand side, we have one of many photos that Alice took featuring her children and her pets. Usually both, almost certainly one or the other of those two categories. And here we have Honoria with the family cat, Topaz. And we will see Topaz once again on this slide. In the picture on the left, we have Honoria sitting on a little stone bench here at Claremont with Topaz tucked in next to her as she holds a little parasol shielding them both from the sun. And on the right-hand side, we have her sitting with either Peggy or Goby. I'm not 100% sure, but they are two Lhasa Terriers that were owned by the family. And actually, we have in a file on Honoria, we have notes taken from a visit that she made in 1989 to Claremont. And one of the things she talked about was Peggy, one of these Lhasa Terriers. And the notes that were taken at Selfridge's department store in London. Lhasa Terrier, then taken to the south of France. Father didn't like the dog, but then in Italy he fell in love with her and would always want to know where she was. In households, there's always one person in the family who's a little bit hesitant about getting a new pet or a new animal, and almost certainly they end up being the one that is closest and most loved by the animal. And John Henry seemed to be the same way. This discussion of Peggy also leads us into, I organize Decidedly less historical looking photographs that I took at my desk of Honoria's poetry journal. And the reason why this fit into this section of the slideshow is the bottom right picture. You see a poem entitled Peggy. This was a journal that was given to Honoria when she was about 10 years old, judging by the time the first poem was written. It was given to her by her grandmother, and there's a little note in there written to Honoria. And then on the page after her grandmother's note, Honoria began, "Poetry I made myself." And what's really nice about this book, aside from the fact that it's these poems written by this little girl and you can see sort of what she's interested in as she grows up, is you can see how her handwriting changes. So this slide and the next slide, we'll see some pages from the journal. And I mean, even from that time, Gloria herself had transcribed some when she was older, but I typed up a couple and I will read them to you right now. The first one will be this very first poem, "The Poetry I Made Myself." And the first poem is, "Comb and brush, I hear a thrush. Comb and comb, Goby is home. Brush and comb, away I roam." Written August 3rd, 1919. Written that same day is, "Daddy, you are funny if you don't love me." And you can tell that because after every poem she wrote, Honoria very painstakingly wrote her entire name, or at least Honoria A. Livingston, and then the date of the poem. Even if she wrote multiple poems in the same day, they all got their date and a name. It's very professional. We skip ahead a little bit in the poetry journal to a slightly more serious sounding poem, which was written August 27th, 1919, and it goes, "Away I roam from my home into foreign lands to rescue my sister from German hands." And honey, or wanting to brush her hair. On January 9th, 1921, I think we have a good indication of what sort of things Honoria was learning. She wrote, "The Queen of Scots at the table sat in the early month of June, when in strode a ruffian, a buxom lad, and cut off her head so soon." There's actually quite a few poems that she has throughout this journal that feature historical figures, and I just have to wonder if that was sort of what she was taught that day by her tutor, and she decided to. We jump ahead a little bit into 1921. Well, it's still 1921, excuse me. But Honoria is about 12 years old at the. It's written on January 22nd, 1921, and it's. I love all of them. But this one is easily the most representative of what it's like to be a 12-year-old girl, or an almost 12-year-old girl. She wrote these two lines, and they say, "When you ask these questions for what, why, where, the only answer you will get is I don't care." And if that isn't a little bit of a preteen attitude, I don't really know what is. And so, for all her formality and her sophistication, Honoria was still very much a young 12-year-old girl. The bottom right-hand picture here is the poem about Peggy, which sort of led us into this section. And Honoria wrote this poem in Florence in 1926 when the family was there so that she and Janet could get a very nice education. They moved to Italy around 1920, and they were there for about 6 years. So January 25th, 1926, she writes, "You have not met my Peggy, my darling bouncing ball. She is a Lhasa terrier, my life, my all in all. Her disposition's very good, she runs to all in love, and likes to sit upon one's lap, be fondled, called my dove. The cat she teases with a will that I can hardly break her from, for Peggy has a temper bad, and one day harm might come. Weeps to see her so. Ah, Peggy, I could or despair about you, never, never. Poem, and really shows you just how much this family valued. They even make it in some more pictures from Honoria's poetry journal. Again, you see a very stark difference in that handwriting. I believe that is from 1922, looks like 24. On the right-hand side, we have a photo from another notebook, or journal of Honoria's that we have, which seems to consist almost exclusively of articles, pictures, and little stories about dogs. Dogs doing heroic things, saving their owners from fires or any sort of thing like that. And she would paste it into this journal. And again, it's a very relatable thing for a young girl to do. She grows up with all of these dogs in her house and she comes to love them, and so we jump back to some more photos of Honoria, and maybe you can see what I meant about the hairstyles changing throughout these photos. The picture on the top right-hand corner does have a date on it, 1918. She is 9 years old, and she has obviously had her hair cut quite short. The picture right below it is taken in 1917, so she is with Peggy or Gobi, and it's unclear whether her hair is short in that photo or just pinned up into her hat. And in the center, you have a very different hairstyle for Honoria. She's sitting right there. She's standing on the left, Janet on the right, and they're standing there with their dolls. And we know that she grew her hair out for a very long time and then cut it short and then grew it out very long again. So you sort of see these changing hairstyles. We now jump forward. An older Honoria, either late teens, early 20s. Photos that her mother takes of her. The one at the top in this collection, just everything about the scene, the bathing costume, the way her hair is styled, it's so and it just feels very glamorous for what looks like a pretty casual shot. The one on the bottom right features Honoria observing the gardens. And again, Alice has her favorite things to take photos of, her children, her pets, and she also loves to include nature. And so there's a lot. On the left, there she is again, sitting in what seems to be a field. Pictures. I tried to sort of break them up into categories if I couldn't quite. So the left-hand picture photos of her and Janet. Janet appeared to be Honoria is dressed as Robin Hood, older sibling privilege. You get to be the title character. In the center, we have a young Honoria costume party. On the right-hand side, we have Honoria dressed in finery, a little bit of a costume, standing on the front porch at Claremont. And if you've ever attended a costumed event at Claremont or seen promotional shots, you will know that those steps and that porch are still very much used today for costume. More pictures of Honoria in costume. The photo on the left-hand side is from a costume of George Washington's birth. And members of the Livingston family were in attendance. They were sort of, one of the highlights of the party was to discuss as the first president of the United States. And so they had members of the Livingston as their ancestors. And Honoria chose to dress as very helpfully in that caption, Mrs. Livingston of Claremont. There are quite a few of those, but there is an article about the party, and she is dressed as Chancellor Livingston's wife, Mary Stevens. So that was her costume for the evening. So that is from a few years later, 25 years later to be exact, 1957, A Costume Party. And she has this lovely dress on. It's very early 20th century, very similar to a lot of things we've seen, like we see pictures of her mother wearing and things like that. And in the center photo, we have Honoria with one of the family dogs, Sarah, the box, which Sarah is a little bit of a hint about. Head on the left. It followed her through her entire costumes. And as Honoria got older, she began to split her time between Claremont, here in the Hudson Valley, and Sarasota, Florida. She had a winter home there. And something else that had a winter home in Sarasota, Florida was the Barnum and Bailey Circus. They had their winter headquarters in Florida, and we do know that Honoria actually sewed costumes for them at one point while she was living in Sarasota. It is a line that is mentioned in her obituary from June 2000 in the Poughkeepsie Journal. So that's very fun. Like, it's just a fun. There are a lot of animals who lived here at Claremont. Once again, I will repeat myself, Alice took a lot of pictures of them. This is the Honoria and Cats page. And as I'm looking at it now, I probably could have arranged it slightly differently, so it was a little more even, but it seems to be two different cats in these pictures. The two photos of Honoria in the coat, the left-hand pictures, that is the same cat. I'm not sure who that cat, I'm not sure of the names of either of these cats. Topaz I recognize, and there was a cat named Felix. And I'm not 100% certain if the cat on the left is Felix, so forgive me for that. But that is clearly part of a little bit of a photo shoot that Honoria did with that gray and white cat. And then there's a Siamese cat with Honoria sitting in that car in the bottom picture and sitting on what appears to be a dock in December of 19. Honoria and dogs. As I mentioned, they grew up around dogs. Their mother, Alice, over the course of her life, had 20 different breeds of dogs in her life. And they were beloved members of this family. And when Honoria got older, she tended to have terrier, as you can see in some of these photos. She definitely had a pug, who we will see in just a moment. But between her and her sister, there was a German Shepherd. There were all kinds of dogs. And we have all of these photos of just the people of the family with their pets. And so, yeah, the Skye Terrier, I believe, is in the bottom left and in that center photo, possibly the right-hand photo as well, just with his ears done. Oh, and there he is in the top left as well. And then on the left-hand side, we have Honoria with the pug. And once again, we come back to snow, and a very nice snowy day for Honoria in 1931. She is here. I'm not sure who the dog is, but I'm assuming the cat is named Sandy. In that bottom picture on the right, you see Sandy get the foreground while Honoria hangs back and watches him walk through the snow very determinedly. Dog, and I would say it would perhaps be one of the best days of 1931 for Honoria. So we are now hitting the Rex and Honoria section of the slideshow. Honoria married a man named Reginald McVitty in 1931, and we will see some of their wedding photos. But before that, I would like to read a little article that I came across. It was published in Columbia County History and Heritage in the fall of 2005, and it's a little story about how Rex and Honoria met and how they came to be a very loving couple who lived on the grounds here at Claremont for many years. The article was written by Aline G. Hatch, who was a resident of Germantown and knew the Livingston family. And in this little story, she recollects an episode where she was talking with the Livingstons. And I'm just going to read the article itself because The Man Who Married Honoria. At a luncheon one day at Claremont, the Livingstons' grand George. I'll never forget that lovely summer day when Cousin Alice married Cousin John. He was referring to Alice Clarkson Livingston, known as Lady Alice, and her husband, John Henry Livingston, long since departed. Lady Alice's son-in-law, Rex McVitty, commented about the family habit another way. Sure, there was no one ever good enough for a Livingston to marry, but another Livingston. Rex, an impecunious Irishman, had broken into this magic circle of privilege by marrying Lady Alice's beautiful daughter, Honoria. He felt quite free to make such facetious remarks, as long as Lady Alice could not hear him. When I asked Honoria one day how she and Rexy had met, she said with her usual sweet smile, "I crashed a party." Not believing my ears, I asked, "Why?" Proper ladylike, elegant Honoria, who looked like a Gainsborough duchess, had broken the rules. A laugh this time. Because I'd heard that it was going to be a good party, and I didn't want to miss it. I had forgotten that Honoria was also very pragmatic. So it was across a room filled with normal-sized people that 6'1" Honoria locked eyes with 6'4" Reginald Leopold Moore McVitty. They fell in love instantly, and forever. Of course, Lady Alice was not at all pleased, but Honoria had an inner coat of steel. She would have her Rexy, and she did. It was rumored that Lady Alice took to her bed for 3 weeks when the engagement was announced. Once the deed was done, however, no word of criticism ever passed her lips. He was family now. One cannot blame Lady Alice for her reaction. Rexy certainly looked the part of a fortune-hunting pirate. His tall frame topped with a mass of curly black hair and his long beak of a nose swooping down over a huge black mustache. His sense of fun and his broad accent quite covered up the fact that he too came from a very proper family. His uncle, Sir Thomas More, was a member of Parliament, but Rexy was an adventurer, selling paper umbrellas in Canada before coming to the United States to dabble in penny stocks. He had already been around the world serving in the British Navy. He had all sorts of wild adventures, but once he married Honoria, he never did a lick of nor Honoria ever cared about money. They settled happily into a small cottage just inside the gates to the long driveway down the hill to Claremont. Their lack of affluence never bothered anyone else either. They were the handsomest and most popular couple in the Hudson River Valley. Practically everyone was a cousin, and they all liked to entertain. And we have just this great little story that ended the article, again, that was written by Aline G. Hatch and published in 2005. And just the story of Rex and Honoria meeting at this party in New York. Here's another couple of photos of them. And a very fun opportunity to play Spot the Dog in these photos. You will see a dog in most of the photos of Rex and Honoria. Left-hand photo, there's actually 2. One back behind them and one walking to the right-hand side of them. And then in the other picture, there's a dog to the right. What's very interesting about Rex and Honoria's courtship and relationship is, as mentioned in that article, they meet at this party, and there's a bit of hesitance from Honoria's family about this young man who seems very rakish and very, very much like a gold digger, perhaps. And at the time, in the late 1920s, early 1930s, there's a very popular trend that is sort of regarded or known as a transatlantic marriage. And a lot of times you would see a woman from a wealthy American family marry a gentleman from Europe who was titled and who had land and was nobility, essentially. The idea being that it's this perfect marriage of title and wealth. So you have Honoria Livingston, who is from the very prominent Hudson Valley family, the Livingstons, And you have Rex McVitty, whose family is from Ireland and who they have some nobility in their blood. His uncle is Sir Thomas More. And so on paper, this looks like a perfect opportunity for a successful transatlantic marriage, except Honoria's family, well off as they are and well regarded as they are not nearly as powerful as they had been a couple centuries ago. At one point, this family owned 1 million acres of land. By the mid-1900s, that's not the case anymore. They are still very wealthy, but they are by no means what they once were. And Rex's family, while they do have nobility in their line, and they own a castle in Ireland, it's really just a castle for show. They don't live in it. It's not their family home. It's not an ancestral estate. And so it doesn't work out as a perfect transatlantic marriage. But as is mentioned in that article, again, they don't really care about whether this is a perfect combination of wealth and title and fame and things like that, because they genuinely love each other. They make each other laugh. Several times in that article, Rex will say something a little bit off the cuff, and it's mentioned that Honoria just sort of laughs or smiles at him. And they just, by all accounts, seem to go very well together, to get on quite well. And you're actually going to see that in quite a few of these pictures. I pulled a lot of pictures of Rex and Honoria because I just think they're very sweet. But these are the photos from their wedding. They were married in Tivoli in September of 1931. I believe it is September 12th. And they had their reception here on the grounds at Claremont. And there is actually, there was an article detailing the wedding in the New York Times and the Social News. And there's a description of what Honoria was wearing at the wedding. And it said, "The bride wore a gown of deep ivory satin made with long, close-fitting sleeves, puffed at the shoulders, fitted bodice, and full skirt forming part of the train, which was edged with orange blossoms and a wide flounce of antique Brussels point lace. Her lace veil and its embellishing lace had belonged to her great-grandmother. The bride was attended by her only sister, Miss Janet C. Livingston," who, if you look at these photos, is the other adult in the picture. The latter wore an old-fashioned gown of peach-colored taffeta with shoulder cape of cream-colored muslin that belonged to her great-grandmother and which was trimmed with ultramarine bows. She wore a headdress of ultramarine ribbon and carried an old-fashioned bouquet. I do really wish that these photos were in color because I would like to see sort of the details on these dresses. But they are very beautiful wedding photos. I particularly like the one on the left, is sort of, it's a little less formal and staged. The bottom left, we have yet another picture from the wedding. And on the top right, if you've ever taken a tour at Claremont, or even if you've seen any of these other presentations that I've been a part of, chances are I have mentioned this photo, and chances are I have talked about how it is my favorite photo in the house. This top right photo was taken aboard the Europa in September of 1931 as Rex and Honoria headed to their honeymoon in Ireland. And they were playing foosball. And it's just such a it's a sweet photo. A, because I learned more about foosball than I ever knew, which was that it's been around for quite some time. And prior to going through Alice's photo albums more in depth, I sort of had this idea that all historic photos are very serious, very stilted, very staged. And so the idea of a more candid photo, such as this one of Rex and Honoria, just seemed very bizarre to me and very just fun. It makes these people feel very real in a lot of ways. And as I went through Alice's albums, I discovered that quite a lot of her photos fit that bill. Here's some more photos of Rex and Honoria on boats. Again, I tried to sort of put them into different categories. On the left-hand side, it is 1954. They seem to be sitting on the deck of a boat. And again, there's just sort of an informality about that picture. They're looking at each other and smiling while he reads his paper, and just a casual sort of intimacy between them. On the right-hand side, we have them again standing on the deck of a boat. Might be the same trip. And then in the middle, there they are in a rowboat. Here are some more photos of Rex and Honoria with dogs. Once again, on the left, obviously, Honoria is holding the dog on her lap. In the center photo, they're standing on the sand, and there's a little dog in the sand next to them. And then there they are preparing for a game of golf. Uh, Again, these are, I think, very sweet photos of Rex and Honoria. The one on the left, the smile that she has in that picture is just so beautiful. And it does look a little as though Rex might be napping on that hillside with her, which is also kind of very cute. I love the middle photo where Honoria isn't even looking at the camera, she's looking at her husband. And it's just very, there's a romance about it. You can see love in the photo. And then on the right, we have Rex. And then we have the photo that I had to give its own slide because truly this may have dethroned the foosball picture as my favorite photo here at Claremont. The caption simply reads, 1939 and the geese. And we have Rex and Honoria sitting on the porch. Honoria's got the Skye Terrier in her lap, it looks like. And they're either feeding the geese or just observing these Canada geese. And there's something so almost chaotic about this photo that again feels very strange for such an old photo. And as I was looking at it and looking at the date, I realized that it was sort of giving me feelings of the Wizard of Oz almost. It sort of had a very similar feeling to it, which given the year makes sense. But I just really, really like this image a lot. Here we have Honoria, Janet, and Rex sitting on a porch. And I believe that is Janet's dog with them. Honoria has the terrier, Janet has the shepherd. And on the left, we have Honoria and her sister sitting with their dogs, and then Rex has joined them on the right. Now we enter a section of photos that didn't really have a category. They were just photos that I really liked, photos of Honoria, and because it is her birthday, she gets to be front and center. So I guess the very general idea of all these photos are just sort of staged photos that were taken of Honoria by her mother. This slide in particular seems to be very water focused. She seems to be sitting on a dock in the one on the left and the one on the right, and the one in the center, she is on a boat. We have another boat with Honoria on the left-hand side here. These seem to be very popular pose in photos, sort of when you're standing aboard a boat and sort of looking off over the railing. And then on the right, there she is with some, I assume, fishing nets. And then in the center, that is, I believe, from the same session as the photo of her and Rex, where she's looking at him. Again, these seem to be part of a photo shoot almost that Alice was doing with her daughter. And the ones on the ends, she's wearing this very beautiful floral headpiece. And on the right, she seems to be sort of blending into the garden almost, which seems to be a sort of, that was the style they were going for. That was sort of the theme of the shoot, as it were. And then in the center there she is leaning up against a tree. And there are a couple other photos that look very similar to that one. And here she is on the front porch at Claremont. Excuse me. On the left, we have a photo from 1955 of Honoria sitting next to one of our beloved lions. Her mother had these brought over from Italy after the family had been living there. And they have graced the front porch for quite some time. They have actually unofficially become known as Rex and Honoria. And so there she is sitting next to one of the lions. And then on the right-hand side, she's quite a bit younger than she is in the 1955 picture. But there she is with Janet and their Jack Russell Terrier, I believe, again, sitting right on the front porch at Claremont. And again, other Claremont landmarks. We have the lion again on the right, and then on the left, Honoria is sitting on a stone wall that if you have visited Claremont, when you look out the front door of the site, there's a little stone wall that sort of looks out over the river. That is a very popular place to take pictures. We take them there a lot for our costumed events, and also just because it's a really nice backdrop. You can't really beat the Hudson and the Catskills. This is again another sort of, it appeared to be almost a photo shoot that Honoria was doing, and she's sort of posing around the gardens and on the lawns. And I like the contrast in these photos, the seriousness on the left-hand side, and then on the right is just such a casual little pose, just like almost as if she's been caught just sort of, stretching or whatnot, and looks at the camera and smiles. And there's just an ease and a simplicity to it that I really like. Because one thing you can definitely say about this family is they were a very glamorous and good-looking family. Honoria inherits just stately and incredibly, as I said, glamorous good looks from her parents. And she maintained them into her later years. So obviously there is a drop-off in the photos that Alice took because she passed away in 1964. And here we have Honoria being interviewed, I believe, in the mid to late 80s. And again, that same poise, that same grace that you saw in her as a young girl, you see still when she's in her 80s. And we end on these two pictures, which again, I think very much encapsulate that poise, that grace. On the left-hand side is a photo that was taken by Rex. He passed in 1979, so prior to then. It is taken on the porch of their home, Sylvan Cottage, which is still on the property at Claremont, though it is no longer inhabited. And there's Honoria holding their cat. And then on the right, another photo of Honoria in her later years. And we were very fortunate to have a member of this family still living and still very closely connected to the site once it was owned by the state of New York. Her mother had deeded it to the state in 1962. It was open to the public around the late 70s, and Honoria lived until 2000. She, as I said earlier, split her time between Claremont and Florida, but she spent a lot of time here on the grounds. And so we're very fortunate that many people who visited the site either encountered her or Rex, depending on when they visited, and they have anecdotes and stories that they tell. And there are ones that get passed around throughout the sites. There's one that one of the education directors at Staatsburg loves to tell about asking Honoria about the kitchen here at Claremont. And when she said she'd never been in the kitchen, someone asked, well, but if you wanted cookies, what would you and your sister do if you wanted cookies? And she said, well, that's what the servants were for. And it gives you such insight into how life was lived here at Claremont and how her day-to-day life was. And so we had put up a post yesterday asking for people to share anecdotes that they might have about Honoria if they ever met her, or Rex, or anyone else from the family, because Alice and Janet were both alive until Alice died, as I said, in 1964, Janet in 1972. If you've encountered any of the members of the family, we were focusing primarily on Honoria because, again, it's her birthday. And no one commented on that particular post, but I would encourage you to comment under this video if you do have any anecdotes, because we love to hear them and we love to share them with people. And the next time we do something like this, perhaps next year for her 113th birthday, we can share some of these stories. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to link a video below in the comments. Our previous orientation video here at Claremont State Historic Site was incorporated quite a bit an interview with Honoria. It was done in the mid to late 80s. And so you can see in these photos, you can see, again, she maintains this sort of posture, this stateliness. She's 6'1" again, and it really shows. But just hearing her speak and hearing the stories she tells about her family are really lovely. So I will link that video down below. It is on YouTube. If you want to check it out, it's called Claremont Remembered, but it will be linked below. So I want to thank you for joining me today as I went through as I fed my new favorite hobby, which is looking at Alice's photos. And I hope we managed to celebrate Honoria very well. And happy birthday, Honoria. Thank you for letting us work in your house. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We hope to see you next weekend. We have some Valentine's Day events next weekend. So come back here and check out our Facebook. Have a nice day, everybody. Happy Honoria's birthday.